to start off with the title page and move straight on to what my take-home message, the overall take-home message or the research outcome might be. I will let you read this. Rather than me reading it out, you can read it much more efficiently. I also wish to thank my colleagues who have participated in gathering the data, who have participated in helping develop this course on which I'm basing this research throughout the years. So the main topics and the structure of my presentation will be that first I will describe what we actually were trying to achieve and how we set about to achieve the research training module or course subject at James Cook Uni for postgraduate students. Then I identify who are the students who benefited the most from this training. I will look at the impact of the subject on the students' achievement and their ability to self-evaluate their level of development. I'm going to show that we have used relatively objective assessment of these metrics rather than asking students with a questionnaire as to what they think they have achieved or how much they think they benefited. I will then discuss my findings, and I finally suggest some ways where the research development framework might be kind of strengthened as a result or as an outcome in response to the outcomes of the research. So we know that research training is nationally held to be a very important attribute of Australia's economic well-being. And as a result, universities, higher education institutions have placed quite a lot of emphasis on research training. We have responded to this need in various ways, starting from introducing research-related content and or segments into undergraduate subjects like field reports and lab reports, literature reviews, etc. Then there is the original research project, where students with some exposure to research training can take on an individual, customized research project, as they do in the Masters of Science or the PhD, where there is certain autonomy is already expected. Bridging this is the Masters by coursework student who at JCU come to in large numbers, generally in the science-related areas, especially in marine science and marine biology and environmental science. And these students, a large proportion of whom is from non-English speaking backgrounds or from North America or Latin America, come with the aim to move on to a research degree later on. But they don't yet qualify the entry requirements to the PhD or the Masters. So they take a Masters by coursework, and it is during that period that we see that there is a really good opportunity. In fact, it's mandatory if we are going to get our students to develop in the direction that will enable them to do the PhD and the Masters, to give them some research training, to give them some idea as to what's expected and how to go about it. The objective of these sorts of classes in every case is that they will enhance and facilitate students' higher order thinking. Employment groups all over the place emphasize higher order thinking, so there's a lot of literature about that. So what do we mean by higher order thinking? Higher order thinking can happen in the cognitive domain, which I will call critical thinking. It's basically how to do things, how to problem solve. The other part of higher order thinking is reflective thinking, critical reflection on not just how to do things and the technical know-how and solving problems, but also understanding cognitive states and cognitive and control of metacognition. So reflective thinking, critical reflection, reflective judgment, these sorts of terms have very fuzzy borders and backgrounds. Psychologists tend to use them very, very strictly and distinguish between them. But in the education literature, I feel that there is a tremendous overlap of these terms, and I would just like to emphasize that I'm going to use them more or less overlappingly, unlike a psychologist would use them. Okay, so how did JCU go about in training students in research skills? The subject, SC 5055, was called Research Methods and Communication in the Natural Sciences. And we took communication as a very important and effective way of trying to enhance both critical thinking but also critical reflection. So the subject was run as a limited attendance, blended learning, design course, and the assessments consisted of basically 3 major assessments: an original research proposal where students could choose the topic that they wanted to probably do research down the line, an oral presentation that was an electronic submission, and a learning portfolio. I'm not going to talk about the electronic oral presentation anymore in this paper, and I'll focus on the research proposal and the learning portfolio. The proposal was submitted twice. First submission, formative submission, was 10% of the final year grade, and students were participating in a workshop that told them first how to create or how to write a research proposal. Students then had some 2 weeks to write their proposals, then submitted them, and they participated in a following workshop where we exposed them about critical writing, writing skills, critical reading, basically communication in the sciences. During this session, the students brought along their proposal that they have submitted, and they received and gave feedback from at least 2 fellow students. And they did this in the workshop to make sure that it was done. So then they received the lecturer's feedback on their proposal. So they had 1 staff member feedback, several student feedbacks, and then they went on to write the final submission, the summative submission, which was worth 30% of the final year grade. So there's a meaty big chunks of assessment contributions here, and that students had to take them seriously. The learning portfolio was 30% of the end of year submission. I'm not going to kind of really go into huge detail of this slide because there's a lot to read on this slide, but essentially what we have here is the level 4 indicators along the RSD framework, and here I detail as to how our assessment criteria of the proposal aligns with the various facets of the RSD. Okay? So have a look at it in your leisure if you're interested. We think we did a reasonably good job of this. Okay, so the next thing I want to sort of explain is how did we assess the learning portfolio? Students submitted 4 pieces of independent reflective essays, small, fairly short essays, that had to align to the subject learning outcomes, where the students are asked to evaluate where they stand now and where they came from along the various subject learning outcomes. They had to support their assessment with pointing to various features of artifacts that they had to include as appendices to the portfolio, and 4 staff marked each portfolio. So that is essential because often single staff members' grading can be biased. So we really wanted students to have a diversity of feedback for future preference, but also we wanted to make our marking much more valid. The portfolio was marked on 2 major elements of reflection and elements of communication. This concerned itself with the writing quality and communication aspects. This concerned itself with the reflection, and in this analysis, I'm looking only at the students' aggregated average mark that they receive for elements of reflection. Okay? So the first thing is who were the main beneficiaries of the subject. And for this, I looked at how students performed at the formative submission, what grade did they get for their first effort, and then I looked how much they improved between the first and the second. And most of the students improved. Okay, so basically here's your 0 mark, which means that if you lie along or above that line, you have improved. If you mark below that, you kind of went backwards. And fortunately, very few students went backwards, and not by much, and most students have improved. The interesting thing is that students who improved by 20% at least or more between the 2 submissions all reasonably low achieving students. Look at the ones who failed. And look at the ones who barely got a credit. All of the students who got well above the credit, distinction, high distinction, they improved, but not that much. So the weaker students seem to benefit most, and that's our first take-home message. The weaker the student, the more benefit. The second question that I wanted to ask is, do the students who achieve these amazing improvements, are they actually more aware of their cognitive processes? Are they better at the learning portfolio? And what we found was that not really. Basically, the better your formative grade was, the better your portfolio grade also was. So that's a bit of a disappointment here, and we sort of think, well, what's going on? And then I finally wanted to know that is the magnitude of improvement, okay, the students are, that there is great improvement between the two proposals, does it align or does it correlate with the learning portfolio score? And here we had a true disappointment because there was no relationship whatsoever. So you may have achieved well in the formative assessment, you achieved well in the portfolio, but that did not mean, so the second submission of the proposal, but that didn't mean that you're going to do well in the portfolio. So you were not really aware as to how you improve or how you are good. You just simply are or you aren't. This was very disconcerting because it also meant that students are not really taking away from the portfolio writing what we all think portfolio writing should do for students, that is, make them aware of their learning. So how to explain these three observations? And these are the three questions that we wanted to ask. Why do students scoring low in the first submission show the most improvement? Why students who improved most seem to unaware how such improvement was achieved? And finally, why students with distinctions or high distinctions for their first submission, that is the good students, have such wide spread across the portfolio results? Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you could explain these trends. First of all, you could say that the students who kind of got a failing or a very mid-credit to low-credit range, many of them decided that, my God, I have to pull up the sock. I've had too good a time in North Queensland. It's, I've got to stop diving and I have to go and write stuff. So they pulled up the sock. The second possible explanation is that they kind of want to keep enjoying diving, and they just simply relied too much on assistance that they gathered from peers, from teachers, from learning advisors, and the places where you can get assistance now as a student is just about endless. And they got the assistance, they implemented it, but they did not give it much further thought, hence low grade for the portfolio. Now we also have to remember that the shape of the curve can also be influenced by the fact that the higher scoring students are happy with their formative grade and did very little to kind of bump it up, and they weren't really aware as to how they even got the good grade to start with. And then, of course, the higher scoring students, you get a HD, there's not much room to improve. So you might improve 5%, but you're not going to improve a hell of a lot more. So these can also weight the slope. So a couple of bits of literature, recent research in the psychology area that give us some very powerful explanation as to what's really going on. And two particular papers, and I will give you the references at the bottom because it just makes your job much easier to follow up, is the so-called performance heuristic and so-called performance bias. The performance heuristic simply says that while we can fairly confidently predict future performance based on past performance, and we all know that, everybody tells you that past performance is the best predictor of future performance. But past performance is not a good predictor of improvement. So, and you should be able to improve if you perform poorly because you have a lot of room to improve. Thank you. What the performance heuristic says that generally people will expect that their future performance will be the same as their past performance, and the poor ones either not going to try hard because they've had a negative experience, and the ones who performed well will expect that they will keep performing well. And this expectation prevents people to critically examine how much room do I have to improve, and then what do I need to do to improve. The performance bias is very similar, and it basically concludes that people base their judgment of learning on their performance rather than on the actual act of learning. Okay? So these two psychological phenomena that a lot of us fall prey to actually prevent students from engaging with the metacognitive skills. And I've run out of time, but there are some other references for you to look at. And finally, that we really have to somehow incorporate this very powerful prevention of developing good researchers where reflective skills or reflective judgment is hugely important. You can't reflect, you're not going to be a good researcher. Thank you.